So Insta360 actually offered to buy me the GoPro Hero 13 to compare the two cameras. And of course I took that to mean that they're pretty confident in their own camera. And so I expected the Ace Pro 2 to really just win hands down over the GoPro. However, when I actually started testing them side by side, I started to have some doubts and thought maybe it's not going to be as clear cut of a winner as I thought it would be. And this was mainly because when I got some initial footage back to my Mac and started comparing them, there wasn't as big of a difference as I expected. The image quality was relatively comparable in a whole bunch of shots. And I want it to be really clear, this video is not sponsored by Insta360. They don't get any previews of my content and they don't have any input. They see it at the exact same time you do. And if I'm being totally honest, I actually kind of wanted the GoPro to win because GoPro is kind of like the OG of the action camera space. They've been around for ages and for years they've had a bit of an aura around them because they've just been the go-to. So let's get into a bit more of the details, and I want to start by sharing my initial impressions, especially of the Hero 13, because I've had the Ace Pro for a little while now. And one of the first things that struck me when I got the GoPro out of the box was actually the build quality. It didn't impress me as much as I thought it might. I noticed that particularly the plastic just kind of doesn't look as high quality as the Ace Pro plastic somehow. And this genuinely surprised me, especially because again, GoPro has been such an iconic brand for such a long time. I expected really top tier quality from this from the get-go. And it's not bad, don't get me wrong, it's still super sturdy. I'm not going to have any issues with this breaking, but it just doesn't feel like it's quite got the edge. The next big thing that stuck out to me was the lack of articulating screen on the Hero 13. So on the Ace Pro 2, you've got a screen that can flip right up, whereas on the GoPro, you've got a front-facing LCD screen, which admittedly is nice, but remained to be seen whether I liked it more than the flip-up screen. And then lastly, I think the other big thing that I noticed was that the Ace Pro 2 has their proprietary quick release mount on the bottom and no 1/4 inch thread, while the GoPro has a 1/4 inch thread and an inbuilt pop-out mount that you can attach accessories to. Apart from this, overall the designs are fairly similar. The Ace Pro 2 screen is a little bit bigger, but otherwise if it wasn't for the colored accents and the logos, you probably wouldn't be able to tell them apart from a distance. Now I started taking both these cameras out for some testing, and this is when I got those initial results where the footage looked pretty comparable. But there were a few things aside from the footage that I noticed fairly quickly that I just want to mention. First of all, the Ace Pro 2 has haptic feedback while the GoPro doesn't. Now, it's only a small thing, it obviously doesn't affect your image quality, but it's kind of nice to have, and I did miss it on the GoPro. The next thing was actually gesture control. Now I haven't used the gesture controls a whole heap on the Ace Pro, but when I need them, they're actually incredibly useful. And there is no gesture control or voice control on the GoPro. I found this came in really handy when I had the cameras set up inside my car while I was driving. And when I wanted to stop and start recording, it was so much safer and easier using gesture control than having to actually physically reach and press the button on the GoPro. And I'm sure this could come in really handy in all sorts of scenarios, especially if you're shooting action footage. And then the other thing I noticed when I got home to actually offload the footage was that the options to offload footage from the GoPro are a lot more limited than the Ace Pro 2. So Insta360 has a fully fledged desktop app, which I really like. It's the only thing I personally use to transfer my footage. I don't even use the mobile app, even though that's really good as well. Whereas GoPro apparently seem to be focusing much more on mobile these days. They've discontinued support for their quick desktop app, which I think is a huge mistake because surely there's a lot of videographers out there who mainly use desktop and don't want to have to fiddle around on their mobile phones who would still want desktop access to their files. So that confused me a bit. Even though the quick app is discontinued, you can still download it and it does the job to transfer files, but there's really no comparison with the Insta360 app. Now from here, like I said, the initial footage was relatively comparable. I think the biggest things that stood out to me was the color accuracy. There was a definite color difference, and I noticed that the GoPro overall looked warmer in overcast shots. And I think to me, the Ace Pro had the edge in terms of vibrancy and color accuracy. Now, of course, this round of testing was pretty limited. So I went out and did a second round of testing. And this is when the difference started to become a lot more obvious to me. Now I had them set up side by side on just a little rig that I built so that I could get the same shots on either. And as I was filming, I started to notice that the GoPro was actually incredibly frustrating to use. Now, a big part of that in my head is the user interface design. So on the Ace Pro, it's incredibly intuitive. I really like that on all the Insta360 cameras, they use the same UI. So no matter which camera you're using, it's always familiar and it's just really intuitive. It's really straightforward. Everything makes sense. It's really well laid out. All the modes are really clear and obvious. The settings are really well laid out. Whereas on the GoPro, it just doesn't feel as intuitive. It still feels like it's stuck in like the 2010s or something. It doesn't feel like they've updated it in ages. You do have a range of modes to choose from, but they're all kind of buried deep into the menu system, and you can only kind of quick change between photo, video, and time-lapse modes. I also didn't like that every time I changed between different modes, it would forget the settings that you just set up previously. And so I found you kind of have to create presets on your own rather than the presets already being built in. And honestly, I'm really surprised. I just don't really understand why GoPro's menu system is just so clunky compared to Insta360. And it really did make a big difference to me when filming. I actually started to feel frustrated trying to just operate the GoPro, and I've never felt like that with the Insta360 cameras. So that to me is a huge missed opportunity with the GoPro. On top of that, I found that the GoPro touchscreen wasn't as responsive as the Ace Pro either. And so I found that often I'd be pressing buttons on the screen and accidentally changing settings that I didn't mean to, just because the screen was kind of lagging or it wasn't responding the way I wanted it to. Whereas again, the Ace Pro 2 doesn't have that issue. It's very responsive. Everything moves very quickly. It's very snappy, and all the modes are laid out really clearly. They're all explained very well. And so that to me, aside from the image quality, started to become enough to convince me, honestly, that the Ace Pro is the better buy. I just can't understand why the GoPro is so difficult to use. I'm sure once you get familiar with it, it would be fine, but these are pretty comparable in price. And so I just don't understand why you would opt for the GoPro over the Ace Pro. As I was testing, the other thing that ironically stuck out to me was the quick release versus the 1/4 inch thread. In the past, I've kind of complained about the quick release system on the Ace Pros, but this actually kind of made me appreciate it because it was so much easier to switch accessories rather than having to screw a 1/4 inch thread every time. Obviously, I know you can get quick release mounts for the GoPro, but they're not included in the box, while they are with the Ace Pro. And the other thing that I noticed that I really do prefer is having a flip up screen. The amount of times I was filming kind of at chest height and wanted to see what was being shot on the GoPro and I couldn't because it was too low. It was just so annoying. Whereas with the Ace Pro, I could just flip the screen up like halfway and I'd have a really good view of everything that I was filming. Even when I had the camera setting up filming me from the front, I couldn't change any settings on the GoPro without turning it around. And that was really annoying, especially when I had it mounted to my car window. Whereas again, with the Ace Pro, if I wanted to change any settings, because the screen's articulated and it's a touchscreen, I could just change any settings without having to move the camera itself. And over the following few weeks, I did a bunch more video tests in different lighting conditions. And this again is where things started to become a lot clearer to me. I think in ideal lighting conditions where there's lots of sun and lots of light, you can get fairly comparable image quality between the two cameras, but in pretty much any other lighting condition, the GoPro really starts to fall apart very quickly. So for example, when it was overcast, like I said, I noticed that the color temperature on the GoPro was really warm and it didn't quite match what I saw in real life, while the Ace Pro seemed a lot more color accurate. When it comes to low light, the Ace Pro 2 actually completely destroys the GoPro Hero 13. In some of my shots, you couldn't even see anything on the Hero, while you've still got somewhat usable footage from the Ace Pro 2. In terms of resolution, on the Ace Pro 2, you can shoot up to 8K, while on the Hero 13, you can only shoot up to 5.3K. Again, in ideal lighting conditions, they looked relatively comparable, but in pretty much any other scenario, especially when the light wasn't ideal, the Ace Pro would always win. Particularly when it came to noise and sharpness levels, there was always more noise on the GoPro. I also tested the HDR modes and the log modes. So when it comes to HDR, I think that was the one thing that maybe the Hero 13 slightly edges out the Ace Pro 2 with. I did notice, especially in cloudy scenarios, that the GoPro seemed to get a little bit more detail out of the sky, which did look nice, but to me it's really too little too late because you've just got so much more versatility in the Ace Pro. Now when it came to shooting in log mode, I found I could grade them fairly similarly, and there the differences were less obvious, again in more ideal lighting conditions. But if you're not wanting to grade all of your footage all the time, I just can't see any benefit to getting the GoPro. I'm really curious to hear your thoughts. I put up a poll on Instagram to get an idea of what people thought would win, and people did think the Insta360 would win, but there was still a decent amount of people that voted for the GoPro. But to be totally honest with you, even if I had bought both of these cameras myself, I would return the GoPro. Insta360 just feels like it's leagues ahead, not only in image quality, but just in ease of use and the overall UI. It feels like they've taken on feedback from their users and implemented it, whereas the GoPro honestly feels like it's getting pretty outdated. Now, if you want to see my full review of the Ace Pro 2, then you can check that out right here. And again, in the meantime, let me know what you think of these two cameras in the comments.